Thank you, Lay. Okay, now I'll look at the question. So after I've had a look at to analyze certain parts of it, what's the question asking me to do? Okay, so from you can see I highlighted the verbs and then underlined some key words, and a couple of words are in bold. I call them sort of categorical words. Let's go through them one by one. So the highlighted word how, from what I know, I need to give textual examples and relate it back to text and human experiences. A very key verb in HSC, how. So always, never forget your quotes and your textual examples. The next highlighted word is complement, which means to support and to have a balance. And this means to have a balance of the two, both the visual and the poem. They need to support each other. We can't forget that we need both visual techniques and poetic literary techniques. The next verb is emphasize. So what do I have to do? I've got to highlight a certain thing. I've got to show off a particular feature. Because we use the actual word emphasize in the question, I really need to focus on what it's talking about. Whenever you see these kind of exaggerated words like emphasize, then you really want to pay attention to what it's asking next, because you want to have that in your first sentence. You want to address it straight away. Okay, so next are the key words to really explain what I need to do. So these are the underlined ones. The visual representation complements the poem, so I need both visual and textual examples and have a balance of both. And underlined is the part that destroyed the subject. So this, the subject being the kings and the statue. We can't talk about anything else because it's quite clearly in the question. We need to talk about the king statue. And the main thing that it's in bolded, the categorical words, were invited to expand on these features. These are quite vague words, idea and quality. So you need to have a very good definition of the idea that comes out of the text that you've read, and what quality have you identified? What do you think is the quality that destroyed the subject? All right, if you can just click Lay and an example will come up.
Is it go? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Here's an example of my annotations. What I identify, the quality that destroyed the subject is pride. The idea, the conclusion that or the message, the call for action, remembering the 3 categories from when I was reading it, when I was reading the text, I wanted to find a call for action when it's trying to tell us to do what message is trying to get us to take away. The message that pride destroys people as it's represented by the king in the poem. Pride leads to destruction, and an excess of pride may be unfavorable. And the literary techniques address the how component of this question, and I'll just take them straight from when I was reading the text and from tracing back my reaction as the audience to the arrogant and hostile tone, also the contrast of the visual and the salient portion of the king in the foreground. All right, moving on. Okay, so here are some additional links to the common module rubric. We know we need to address the rubric. That's why we spent so much time at the beginning breaking it down. So these bolded parts are straight from the rubric, and they're actually worth memorizing before you go into your exam. You should have them ready. You should know what their definitions are, and you should be able to pull them out really quickly to address all of your short answer questions. Okay, so here's how I linked it. The human quality that I identified was pride. The human emotions that emerged from the quality was arrogance, and is in particular Ozymandias's arrogance to be immortalized into a statue so it can be remembered. Ozymandias's motivation, a very human motivation, is to maintain power and dominance even beyond death. He wanted to be remembered. He was so motivated by that that it led to his actions, and therefore his therefore the quality that we remember him by. Okay, a couple more. The paradox. The poem points out how reality doesn't align with perception, and actually it's the perception that forms a reality, even though it looks like the reality is not what it seemed. Okay, the anomaly is that the intended result just wasn't achieved. If we look at it from King Ozymandias's perspective, it very likely never occurred to him that he would not be remembered for a long period of time, and it actually was his pride and his such strong motivation to be remembered as someone very powerful that actually led him to be remembered as someone who wasn't powerful at all, someone who just faded away into time. Okay, the individual human experience. We can learn from Ozymandias's experience, obviously not his experience was, because it was such an anomaly, it's one that was quite individual to someone who was in power at a particular time and who had that means to have a statue memorialized for himself, and who was also a result of weathering time and having civilization broken down around him. The collective human experience from that is that pride is a quality that we all possess, yet we must control so that we don't have our arrogance that dismantles our identity or dismantles how we're seen as time goes on. So make your assertions according to the key terms, make it according to the key rubric terms, and those are quite important because they will make a really strong, solid answer. You've got to have all those components in order to hit all the marks that you need. The markers will be looking for not just the analysis, not just your understanding of the question, but also your links back to the question, back to the rubric. And this is where I find that a lot of students fall down and they lose their marks. They might get a 3 or a 4 instead of a 5 marker, is because they haven't given enough links back to the common module. They might have given links back to they might have strong links back to the text, so they've got their textual they've got their techniques and their quotes. They might have strong links back to the question that they're answering, but they may not have gone that extra step to go on to link it back to the common module. So don't forget those. All right, so moving on, Lei. Okay, so a basic structure of a response will look a little bit different for each question in terms of length, but always know the essential elements. Have an overarching structure that you can quickly list out in your head and you can check off against them as you're writing. So a thesis, a mini argument or mini thesis, some textual examples and analysis that link and explain and support your mini thesis. And you need, at the end of the day, clear links back to the module. This is very, very simplified, but that's normally the formula that you can take into the exam and expand it. If you are asked a question with more marks, then you need more supporting quotes, you need more evidence, and you need more links back to the module. And you need to have it expressed in a logical and coherent way, so likely you'd have to have more than one paragraph. Okay, but in this example, using a similar paragraph planning model and using the points from when I've broken them down in the previous slides, stating the argument, the mini thesis. The human quality is pride, and the idea is that the idea of the collective human experience of destruction from pride. Some textual examples. We need them from both the text and the visual. They emphasize the idea that the techniques draw particular attention to pride and destruction. Haven't put them here, but here you can go into the quotes and also the techniques that we've found. And thirdly, how we're going to link it back to the text and human experiences module. There's a contradiction between human desire and the motivation of Ozymandias and the actual experience, or the result. So paradoxically, he was the one that fought so hard to make sure he was remembered for his power, but his tenacity and his fight to be remembered for his power specifically ended up being the very same reason that he was remembered in such a pitiful and powerless way. So there's a really strong paradox here, and because it's presented to us with this third person recalling this traveler, this idea emerges that collectively humanity experiences an over excess of pride, and that can really easily lead to destruction, as we show by how the statue was so eroded by time. There are lots and lots of other ways to plan instead of this, and remember that in an exam condition you obviously won't have time and you won't have writing space in order to do all this, to do planning before you jump into your actual response. But this is something you can set up in your head and walk yourself through these steps and check them off in your head as you are reading and as you are writing. These are ways that we can plan, that we can see here, ones you can actually practice in the few weeks now leading up to your HSC exams. So Lei, would you like to explain some of the other ways that you can do some planning?
Yeah, well, first of all, oh wait, am I muted? No, I'm not, thank God. Okay, so first of all, there are so many ways of how you plan, and we all know that there are some visual learners, there's audio learners, there's so many different ways. So find one that works for you and stick to it. Don't go chopping and changing, especially now. You have about 8 weeks from now to the HSC. Yes, I know, only 8 weeks. And you need to stick to that one way that you're going to plan. And planning, I know Nat spent a really, really long time explaining how to plan, but all of that thought process, all of those ideas that came to her head, that happened within the 5 minutes of reading time that she would have gotten in the exam, and possibly maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute prior to actually writing. So say she was to do this steel paragraph planning in a bullet point form, she would have 3 bullet points, and she probably wouldn't even write it in full sentences. The reason why she wrote so much of this here is obviously because we're teaching you guys how to do that. But in an exam condition, these would probably be codified. So there might be HQ equals pride, arrow, collective human experiences equals destruction. And then the next one would be pride, and then she'll have maybe little lines there, text and visual. So your plan doesn't need to be legible, but it needs to be something that you can understand, and it needs to be something that allows you to structure an entire piece of writing that is straight to the point, where your argument or your mini thesis is shining. You don't want to lose your answer in between all your examples and analysis, because without that strong argument or strong thesis, you lose a lot of those marks as well. So sometimes easiest that most people do are bullet points. I've also seen some really great mind maps where people will just do a little bit of a brain dump in the corner of their page, and then they'll just write 1, 2, 3, and 4 next to those ideas so that they know which way they're going to do that. Doodles, so this one takes a little bit of preparation, but if you have little symbols that represent different ideas, and that can help you sort of organize your thoughts during an exam condition, or flowcharts as well, very similar to mind maps. But whatever works for you, pick it and stick to it. And this is also in that booklet of yours. There's a little bit of an explanation of how you could use each of those different ways to plan. But those 30 seconds, that 1 minute it takes for you to plan your like 3 mark, 5 mark, 8 mark questions is a difference between a band 4 and a band 5, or even a band 5 to a band 6. So we really, really want you guys to make sure that you plan all of your answers. It might feel like a minute taken away from writing, but that minute provides more quality rather than quantity in your writing. Yeah, yes.